Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mary Ann Hensley. I'm the Vice President of Media Operations here at FreightWaves, and we're happy to present this webinar in partnership with J.J. Keller and Associates, which is dedicated to employee safety across multiple industries, including freight and transportation. Today's webinar will focus on the dash cam debate and will include the results of a recent survey that FreightWaves and J.J. Keller conducted about the use of dash cams in the industry. But first, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Dean Croak is the Chief Insights Officer here at FreightWaves and is active in data science and analytics. He has spent the better part of his career in the freight industry, both in an executive level at Spirion and Omnitrax Analytics and as a commercial driver. He has 35 years of experience in data analytics, transportation, supply chain management, data mining, and insurance and risk management, and has a wealth of knowledge under his belt. On the J.J. Keller side, Steve Murray is Vice President of Content and Consulting Services for J.J. Keller. He leads a team of 50 editors and consultants with specialized safety and compliance knowledge who advise business leaders across industries on rigorous and complex regulations. Steve has more than 25 years of leadership experience, including general management of large fleet operations. Eden Weller is Senior Customer and Market Insights Manager for J.J. Keller. Eden leads the corporate research function and manages a talented staff of research analysts and specialists. With 15 years of research industry experience, he's responsible for driving strategy and innovation through research and strategic decision-making. And finally, Mark Shedler is Editor of Transportation Management at J.J. Keller, including publications such as Everyday Transportation Safety Management, the Hours of Service Handbook, and the FMCSA Compliance Manual for Passenger Carriers. With more than 28 years of experience in transportation, he is the company's expert on transportation operations and safety, hours of service, ELD requirements, and dash cams. Steve, Eaton, and Mark will be sharing their thoughts around the pros and cons of dash cams and considerations to make as the industry is looking to reduce liability and risk for themselves and their drivers. We'll also have a live Q&A with our speakers following the presentation, so be sure to get your questions ready for them. And before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, if you have any issues at all during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to our team via the chat function in your Zoom control panel. And if you have questions that you would like to ask our presenters, you can enter those through the Q&A box in your control panel, and we'll answer as many of those as we have time for at the conclusion of the presentation. At this point, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dean to share the findings of the survey.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome to today's webinar, everybody, sponsored by J.J. Keller, industry leaders in telematics, including ELDs and wonderful dash cams, such as the Dash Cam Pro. As a commercial driver in a prior life to moving here in 2000, about 20 years ago, I did about 2 million miles as an over-the-road driver and owned and managed fleets. And in the days before iPhones, I would issue fleets, every driver with a camera. And even back before the digital era, when iPhones became more common, just having photographic evidence of an accident was vastly helpful. But today, with the technology that we've got, it's a piece of technology I would never leave home without. I still own a Class 8 truck. I still drive on the road. For me, it's like one of those pieces of technology that's absolutely compulsory for lots of reasons. So with that, I want to dive into our presentation today. We've got some fascinating research and insight to share with you. In particular, we're going to talk a lot about driver behaviors, a little bit about corporate management views, but a lot about driver behaviors. And by that, I mean all road users. Because for those of us in the trucking industry, we know that most accidents involving trucks are caused by another vehicle. So our survey that we're going to share with you touched on a range of topics, including acceleration, speed, lane drifting, cornering, insurance costs, management techniques, legal issues, and of course the one thing that I'm seeing happening more and more now in our social media connected era, and that's the dreaded brake check. And it seems to happen when I drive now in my truck. It seems to happen about once every trip, and when a trip I mean about 2,000 miles. Someone will pull in front and just slam their brakes on just for the fun of it, and then take off, and then they'd slam their brakes on again and cause you to slow down. And if you follow a lot of people on social media in the trucking industry, as I do, you see the brake check happening fairly frequently, both here in the United States and overseas. So, and I've seen in a couple of cases with personal friends where the dash cams actually saved them in the event of an accident, and the car driver's been charged with driving in a manner dangerous as a result of their actions. So our survey that we'll share with you talks a lot about the driver aspects of this. We surveyed 338 trucking fleets, and we divided the survey questions up between two groups. One is those without dash cams to see why they don't use the technology. And we also surveyed those with the technology to see why they use it and what are the perceived benefits. So the first question we asked was, do you have a dash cam installed in at least some of your trucks? And 30% of respondents said they have both inwards and outwards facing cameras. 40% said they have outward facing cameras only. And another 30% said they have none at all. And that's the part that I find the most surprising, is that there's at least 30% of fleets that we surveyed don't consider dash cams a necessary technology. In my prior role to joining Spirion, I managed Lance's long-haul truck insurance business, which is about $100 million book of business. So it's a sizable group of insurance risk. And one of the things that we always credited companies with was having technology that could help exonerate them in the event of an accident. And when insurance claims are underway and the process is evolving, lack of evidence is one of the biggest issues that underwriters face. Just the fact that 30% of fleets we surveyed don't have any form of dash cam, I just find that really, really surprising. The next question we asked was about what sort of fleet they were. So we broke it out by two categories. 69% of fleets with dash cams are classified as for-hire carriers, and slightly higher at 71% of for-hire carriers don't have dash cams in this survey. Of the group with dash cams, 26% of them were private fleets. In the group without dash cams, 22% were private fleets. So roughly the same between both, but essentially dominated by for-hire carriers in both categories. The next question we asked was what sort of fleet size they had. And again, the darker color here on the chart are the fleets with dash cams. So to summarize what you're looking at here, in the lighter gray or blue is the fleets without dash cams, and the dark is with. 51% of fleets with dash cams have more than 100 trucks. So they're the bottom three bars, 100 to 299, 300 to 999, and 1,000 plus. So 51% have more than 100 trucks. So to put it into context, the survey is a little bit top heavy, it's especially for those with dash cams. But to put that into context, about 60% of North American fleets are owner-operators, but they only account for about 8% of trucks on the road. So even though the survey is weighted towards the larger fleets, it's also a good representation of the number of trucks on the road. But with 51% of respondents having more than 100 trucks, I think we've got a really good sense of where the industry's going in terms of adoption trends. But overall, if you look at that chart there, what you see is the lighter colors. As the fleets get smaller, they're more likely to be without a dash cam. And I'm not sure why that is, but my general takeaway from this particular question is there's a higher adoption rate for larger fleets. They have more exposure to litigation and liability. They've also got more resources. They may or may not be more safety conscious. I'm not sure about that. I have some theories as to why smaller fleets don't adopt technology like this, and a lot of it's got to do with cost and compliance. But generally speaking, larger fleets have a higher adoption rate as related to this question. We also asked when fleets installed their first dash camera. And interestingly, 40% said they'd implemented them in the last 20 months, which, if you think about it, is exactly the same time frame that we've had the ELD mandate in place. In fact, the ELD mandate came in on the hard mandate came in on April the 1st last year when they started enforcing the ELD mandate. That's about 15 months. But if we go back to December 17, when the mandate came in, we can see that there's a correlation between the two, which again, I find fascinating, that people were looking at both technologies simultaneously. But about 20% of those surveyed have had them for at least 5 years, which is again, something I find very interesting. I know most owner operators that I know, they would just never leave home without a dash cam. So I think there's an interesting trend emerging here in relation to adoption rates. It's certainly really good that people are looking at this technology more so since we've had more focus on in-cab technologies such as ELDs. The next question we asked was about how many trucks in a fleet currently have dash cams. So we're asking for the percentage of trucks in an operator's fleet that have dash cams installed. And the results show that 52% of those surveyed had at least 100% of their trucks running with a dash cam currently. And a further 18% had them in at least 80 to 100% of their trucks. So if you sort of add that together, you end up with about 70%, and certainly the vast majority of trucks in those fleets have dash cams in all of the trucks or almost all of the trucks. So it's kind of all or nothing by the look of that particular data set there. Next question we've got, and I'll just summarize this for you, and you'll have a copy of this after the presentation, but it's a quite a detailed slide where we asked about the major benefits, both perceived and real, between having dash cams and not having dash cams. So the group on the left are the fleets with dash cams, the fleets on the right are without dash cams, and we've listed here the top 7 reasons that were given by both groups. And just to summarize, 7 of the top 8 benefits are safety and cost related, which is, again, very interesting. 4 of the top 7 benefits involved insurance, which we'll cover a little bit later. Interestingly, some of those said that the savings may not necessarily materialize in lower premiums, and there's lots of reasons for that, but there are other savings that can add up. There were very similar benefits expected from those without dash cams and the benefits expressed by those who've already implemented them. So there was some similarity there. But the biggest factor in all of the survey responses here to both questions, in terms of those with and without, was insurance. It was by far the biggest factor, and it was in 3 of the top 4 listed, which is just shows how much it's playing on people's minds. And we'll dig into the actual cost of insurance piece in a couple of slides, but I just want to summarize a couple of parts of the insurance business. One is the legal aspect, and the other is the actual cost of risk, both claims cost and insurance premium. On the issue of the importance of legal issues when you have a dash camera, we asked survey respondents to rank from 0 to 5, 5 being the highest, as to how important this particular subject was. Across the board, we can see that there's a strong correlation between those with and without. So there's not a lot of difference between the two. Both groups pretty much see companies' liability, if it doesn't act on footage from a dash camera, would be the biggest issue that they would have to deal with in both groups. And of course, that's the same with any technology, no matter whether you're talking about telematics technology, ELD devices, anything that measures speed, braking, any outwards camera, inwards camera. If you're not managing the data feed that comes out of that and applying appropriate countermeasures, it does create additional liability. So it's very important for fleets to not only install the technology, but also have a process that's documented that shows how they deal with the particular issue and what driver training and mitigation was enacted. So company liability is at the top of it. No surprise there. Driver privacy rules and regulations rank equally. That's pretty much tied to inwards, outwards. There's lots of privacy issues associated with the inwards aspect of this. But that's the legal issue. Now, the other issue we talked about in the survey was the change in driver turnover and application hire rates. And what was fascinating with this particular question was that 74% of participants said that turnover stayed the same or decreased. So for those that put the technology in, they saw immediate benefits in terms of driver turnover. But in contrast, if you look at the lighter shades of bars there, you'll see that those without dash cams thought that turnover would increase as a result of the installing the technology. So it's a very different view to those that put the technology in. So the reality is that when you put technology in like this, driver turnover levels don't increase, they actually decrease in most of the cases and fleets we talk to. I have some theories as to why this might be. I think it could be related to possibly driver standards, training, compliance issues. Smaller fleets are somewhat more reluctant when it comes to new technologies. It could be a wait and see. It could just be cost, because we've got a market that's oversupplied with capacity right now. Freight rates are pretty low. It could be also a cost factor playing out in this. Next question we asked was about the correlation between in-dash camera use and a reduction in accidents. And 56% said they see a correlation between a reduction in accidents and having a dash cams installed. But only 39% of those without a dash cam believe there's a correlation. That's a pretty big gap. So those that have implemented, they see a direct correlation. Those that haven't put them in see a less of a correlation. It's somewhat counterintuitive, but does point to where marketing and education efforts need to focus on to realize the benefits of this technology. This is, I categorize dash cams as technology you don't know you need until you really need it. Like, it's one of those pieces of technology that's going to sit there passively recording video, and it's only going to be triggered by a G-force event when something really bad happens, which in a truck driver's life is a fairly rare occurrence. It's not like this is happening every single mile. It may be happening every few thousand miles, but it just needs to be sitting there passively doing its job when you need it. So it's not a technology like a speedometer, for example, that's constantly recording information. This is one of those pieces of technology that I think every truck should have, um, without doubt. So the one of the last questions we asked, and it talks about the insurance premium issue that we just talked about. We asked about how much the average insurance premium had been reduced since they've begun installing dash cameras, and how much it would take to implement them. So how much change would it take? We asked survey respondents to put a numerical value on how much the insurance premiums need to change before they'd install them. I'll just summarize for you. Four of the top seven involved insurance, 60% said that the benefits had yet to materialize, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. There's other reasons for that that are outside of the technology's capability. But nearly two-thirds say between 10 and 40% savings would be needed before they would adopt dash cams. I think that's probably a little bit aggressive. I don't know that you'll get those sorts of insurance premium savings on a cost per power unit basis, but it's entirely possible. We'll cover that in a minute. 40% of respondents with dash cams noted that premiums had decreased, but only half of those respondents achieved savings above 10%. And again, when I ran an insurance company, we heard talk of 10% reductions for people that had installed technology like this. From an insurance company perspective, it's actually fairly hard to quantify the benefits of this without the technology installed. You actually have to have the technology installed, and unfortunately have some events to create a claims experience around this. So it's not immediately evident to underwriters what the actual benefit of this technology is. There's lots of perceived benefit. It makes sense from an operational perspective, but in the insurance industry, they work on very different metrics. But what we will say is that when we surveyed the group, those with dash cams said they may not be seeing a decrease in insurance rates to the degree that they anticipated, but generally respondents said they are still seeing monetary benefits in the form of lower legal fees and litigation costs, which is a really big issue, because when you have a litigation situation and you have a plaintiff attorney approach you, if you can then present, or certainly let them know through your legal counsel that you have video evidence, that often heads off a lot of litigation right there and then, certainly based on my experience. The obvious outcome of that is that you have fewer insurance claims, and overall it decreases the average value of insurance cost. And of course, there's much less time spent in the claims process. Other benefits that fleets indicated to us in the form of free-form text were increased driver productivity, less wear and tear on vehicles, and improved fuel costs. But in the insurance commercial market, it's very cyclical. And I think this is important to make a point here, because right now we're heading into, or are in, what we call a tight insurance market, or a hard insurance market. The insurance market goes through these cycles every few years where they categorize it as a soft market or a hard market. And right now we've been in a soft market for many years. We're coming out of that market. The insurance premiums are increasing. And what happens essentially in the insurance industry in the soft market, you've got lots of capacity, there's lots of underwriters, there's lots of big investment firms providing capital to underwrite truck fleets. So you see this excess capacity of insurance underwriters, and then insurance premium rates go down, underwriting standards reduce, because all of the underwriters are out there competing for the same business. What happens eventually is that the claims experience catches up with the commercial motor insurers and gets to a point where they start to lose money on that particular book of business, and they pull back from it. And what's happened in the last few months is there's insurance carriers in the commercial auto space are pulling back from that market. And what that does, when you reduce capacity in the insurance market, the market starts to harden because you've got fewer people willing to underwrite the risk. So right now we're heading into a hard market. We did some research last month through our Freight Intel research group, and we asked respondents about what they thought were happening to insurance premiums in 2019. 20% said they were about the same this year as last year. 30% thought they were slightly higher. But really surprisingly, and this fits with what we know from the commercial insurance world, about 50% of respondents said that premiums were significantly higher. If you've been following us on FreightWaves, you'll know that we've been writing about the 10 companies that have filed for bankruptcy this year. And 2 of those cited rising insurance costs as the primary reason. So as we head into a hard insurance market where underwriters are looking for carriers to demonstrate how they manage risk and to also reduce the probability of accidents and therefore the cost of insurance, I don't know that there's ever been a better time to put dash cams in trucks right now. Because if you can do anything to demonstrate a couple of things: one, to your underwriter how you're managing risk and what your process looks like, and 2, be able to provide evidentiary material to prove that your drivers were not in the wrong. And that's a really important topic, because in the absence of any material, underwriters have to rely on a lot of hearsay. And often when you look at claim forms, there's varying different opinions as to what caused accidents. The 2 don't necessarily line up. So that's the survey results that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to hand back to Mary Ann, but I'll just close in terms of the research. I think there's a growing need for dash cams to be put in trucks. I think everybody on the line, if you don't have them, you need to consider that, because the insurance industry is tightening in what they're doing. Based on conversations with some of my previous colleagues, they're really looking for the trucking industry to step up and demonstrate how they're managing risk, as opposed to just managing the cost of insurance.
Great. Thank you so much, Dean. And to those of you listening in, we will be releasing a white paper detailing the findings of this survey as well. So keep an eye on your email inbox in the coming weeks for a notification when that becomes available. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and dive a little bit deeper and get our speakers' perspectives on the findings. So first, let's talk about the importance of this research. Steve, why did J.J. Keller embark on this dash cam survey with FreightWaves in the first place?
Well, we believe the purpose of J.J. Keller is really to protect companies and drivers and kind of help them understand how to mitigate risk, and help them understand the benefits of different safety and risk technologies like dash cams. So we work with hundreds of fleets each year and believe that distraction and complacency are 2 of the biggest challenges facing drivers today. Just in today's world where congestion on our highways is at an all-time high, and where we see just a lot more cab distractions in front of the drivers, it's becoming harder and harder also to find really good experienced drivers. We believe the role of effective driver coaching has never been important. And while the results of the survey clearly indicate that having a technology like dash cams can exonerate your drivers in the case of an accident, we also believe having an effective and real-time tool that can coach and help you improve your driver's performance, like dash cams, is even more important. And we're really looking to validate those benefits with this survey.
Yeah, great. And Eden, now that we've heard the industry speak regarding their thoughts on dash cams, do you feel that these findings are consistent with what you've heard from your partners and customers in the industry?
Yeah, I want to go through some similarities and some differences based on that. Before we do so, I believe there's a poll for our audience. We're interested in kind of the fleet, their adoption of dash cams. If you could bring that up, Marianne, that would be great. And then I'll kind of go into start with the difference that we saw. This survey indicated about a 70% adoption and about 40% having adopted since 2016 or earlier. We think that's probably on the high side when we think about the industry as a whole. Our estimates are closer to 40 or 50% adoption. But certainly we see disparity both in the kind of size of fleet, small fleets and large fleets, and then also the type of fleet, differences in for-hire and private. But certainly it's evident that fleets are adopting this next level of in-cab technology. And we believe that we'll see a trend in adoption similar to what we saw in the ELD mandate, where larger fleets are making the change first, followed by smaller fleets. Dean had mentioned kind of the impact of costs and how costs are coming down. likely making this more affordable for the smaller fleets and the owner-operators. But certainly overall risk-related costs are coming down in many ways. As the study shows, it may not be insurance premiums that are lower with dash cams, but certainly more of the insurance-related savings come in several other ways, those being exonerating or protecting the business, reducing claims, and expediting claims, and thus wasting fewer resources. Do we have those poll results to take a look at, Marianne?
We do, and I just shared those. So we have about half of those of you listening in who responded to the poll. And of those, it looks like 53% of those who voted have not implemented dash cameras. So definitely something to think about, and hopefully something that you're all considering as you look to further advance your own programs and the safety of your fleets. So to Dean.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from Eden's comments there. You know, in my a few years ago, I ran a large truck insurance portfolio, as I spoke to. One of the things that in a tight insurance market like we're heading into, one of the things that underwriters really look for is what a fleet's doing to manage risk. And this falls on the responsibility of mostly the safety department, certainly the risk department within a trucking fleet. But one of the things that I always encourage fleets to do in terms of demonstrating how they manage risk is visit with their underwriter. I know a lot of companies deal with an intermediary, such as a broker. Some of you might even deal direct with insurance companies. But any way you can find to demonstrate how you manage risk, what your processes are, what your technology is, what your countermeasures are, how you remediate with drivers, how you use your technology to talk to your customers, they are really, really important outcomes, because most underwriters look at a fleet with a fairly narrow lens, and it becomes somewhat subjective in most cases based on previous experience. And I would say that anybody that's got a claims experience where you've had some accidents in the past, this would be a really good time to put technology in. To Eden's point about reducing cost, it's not just about the accident cost. It's about the, maybe the lowering of a deductible, for example, per event. There's lots of ways to tackle this. It's not just the net premium, but the cost of claims management is a pretty serious number in the insurance business. It's about 20% of operating costs in an insurance company is just the administration side of the business. Typically, an insurance company pays out about 60 cents in every dollar in claims. Unfortunately, commercial automotive runs much higher. Commercial automotive insurance, when you add in the cost of claims, administration, and profit, it's easy for a commercial motor insurer to be paying out more than $1 for every dollar in premium they get, which partly explains why they go through hard and soft insurance markets. But my perception, or my understanding of the industry, is that right now we're heading into a fairly hard market. Now would be the time to be demonstrating, and that means physically going to meet your underwriter. I've done that a lot of times with large truck fleets, and it's a really, really effective way to do this. Certainly for the large fleets, even for the smaller fleets, just writing a letter and taking pictures of what's inside your truck and demonstrating how you manage risk is also really effective.
Yeah, great perspective there, Dean. Thank you. And Dean, as a former driver yourself, I'd love to hear your thoughts, as there's obviously a lot of controversy surrounding the use of dash cameras, especially when it comes to inward-facing cameras, as drivers often view this as an invasion of privacy. What was your take on the feedback from the survey? What are the benefits, and do you feel that they outweigh the cons? It sounds like you do.
Yeah, I'm biased. Biased because I've had the experience on the road of car drivers trying to run me off the road. I've had the experience of other less experienced student drivers changing lanes and almost taking the hood off my Peterbilt. I see that happen a lot. We've got a lot of new drivers in the industry. They lack the experience. They can certainly steer, but there's a big difference between steering and being a professional driver. So I think it's not just, car drivers. They're certainly the biggest cause of a lot of the issues on the road, and that's why I have a dash cam in my truck, and it's on rolling the entire time. I would never go without it. I think for other fleets, I can understand why fleets are somewhat reluctant, because maybe they're worried about what it will show in terms of their own drivers' performance. I think that could be a factor. But what I would say to anybody that's concerned about their drivers and what the evidence might show, my experience in doing expert witness work on the defense side for trucking fleets is that it's better to have evidence and decide whether to fight a claim or pay it. It's when you've got evidence, it's really quickly to determine who was at fault. And if your own driver's at fault, well, then deal with it accordingly, but don't not put the technology in because you're afraid of what it might show, because the vast majority of cases are actually going to prove that your driver was in the right, especially those fleets that spend time training their drivers and those that act appropriately. So I think it's a must. You have to have this technology in your truck. Why now? Even if you just look at how, Mary, if you just look at how people drive on the roads today, Eden mentioned distraction. What are we, 10 years into the iPhone, the digital age? Everybody's got a phone. The vast majority of people you watch in traffic are either on their phone, texting, navigating. There's so much task saturation inside a vehicle in terms of all of the things you've got to watch and do and monitor, especially for a truck driver. I just think people in general are so distracted. I include truck drivers in that category too, because I also see truckers with big computer monitors, like iPads sitting on dashes with movies running and all sorts of ridiculous things going on. So I understand why the inward camera has some concerns, but what you measure gets managed. And if you don't know what's going on, I think as a fleet, you've got a lot more liability. So my view would be you have to put this technology in as a way to manage risk and manage drivers, but also more importantly, from the outward side, the technology really helps exonerate your fleets, because I see the distraction issue becoming a much bigger problem as we head down this path towards, autonomous vehicles. There's a big gap between now, where everybody's distracted, and when we get to autonomous vehicles. I'd be looking for ways to exonerate me, especially with the higher levels of congestion on roads. As we head into winter, I think it's a really important piece of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, Eden, Mark, anything that you guys would add to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Great. All right. And along those lines, and kind of in light of the opposition to dash cameras from drivers, the results of the survey show that driver turnover rates have actually either remained the same or reduced for about 3/4 of respondents. What are the keys to driver acceptance of dash cameras and helping drivers with dash cam implementation? Mark, is that something you would like to chime in on?
Well, absolutely, Marianne. But before I give my opinion, I would certainly like to see us poll our guests to see what they think might be the most critical aspects of driver acceptance. Is that possible?
Absolutely. Okay.
All right. Okay, so in addition to addressing the privacy concerns that was the second greatest legal concern, the carriers that are successful at getting drivers to accept the cameras, they put a lot of effort into communicating the why of the dash cam implementation, and really the message is we want to improve skills and protect the drivers and the company from a wrongful lawsuit, as Dean alluded to. Also, being receptive to driver input throughout the implementation process and conducting detailed training on what's going to trigger the events, how does that dash cam operate, and the coaching process, so drivers aren't left to wonder what's going to happen and what they're doing that might get them in trouble. And a final, a really important point is that carriers that have done all the things I just said and have integrated the dash cam metrics into their rewards program, they've really seen little to no turnover. I ask people at every event, and when they say that their turnover hasn't been affected, I said, so did you include that in your rewards, your driver performance bonus? And they said, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just sharing the results of this poll, what do you believe would help to improve drivers' acceptance of dash cams? It looks like, again, about half of you responded, 7% saying rewards might help. 34% believe that explaining what triggers cameras to begin filming in the first place might help. 58% the possibility of exoneration following incidents, and then just 1% saying not sure it matters what we do. So some food for thought there. And then moving on, insurance is at the top of the list of benefits named for using dash cameras, but almost 60% have yet to see any reduction in premiums. So do dash cams make sense if there's no reduction in premiums? Steve, can you speak to that?
Yeah, you bet. I agree with Dean. I think for most companies, absolutely. It's really no secret. I think that fleets run on really small operating budgets and small margins. So for most fleets out there, there has to be some kind of return on investment. Now the great thing about cameras, like we talked about, the Dean referenced, not only have the purchase costs come down substantially over the last 3 to 4 years for cameras, but the capabilities of these cameras and the technology have improved to the point that a lot of the fleets that we're talking to are seeing an ROI within less than a year. But that obviously wasn't always the case. But remember too, not all of the respondents in this survey saw a reduction in insurance benefits and premiums, but about 40% did. But also keep in mind, I think it's really important that, as Mark and Dean talked about, that there's other benefits that our customers are seeing and reporting that are even more impactful, like a reduction in crashes, reduction in the severity of the crashes, the prevention of false liability claims, improved coaching and training, and many other benefits.
We had asked, one of the open-ended questions that we asked, and part of this research was, how did you gain buy-in from drivers to accept dash cams in cabs? And we heard a lot of comments that complement what Steve just said. I want to read a few of the open-ended comments to share with the audience. Message the drivers on why we are doing it. So to get them home safely to their families, protect them and the company from false claims, lower our insurance premiums, and flat out make them better drivers. Another respondent said, explain that this is a tool to make us better as drivers and a company, and it protects you, the driver, when someone else is at fault and tries to blame you. Other comments included, we stress how it protects the driver if there's ever an incident. And another respondent described it as an insurance policy for them that doesn't cost them a dime, them being the driver. One last one that I liked was around the drivers actually agreed to the dash cam policy as they understood that it protected them as well. So this is kind of the sentiment when we asked how they sold it to drivers, how they got buy-in from drivers to implement this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Dean, did you have anything to add there?
I was just going to say that one of the other things that underwriters look at things like, number of CSA violations, number of violations, speeding tickets, things like that. When they go to underwrite a fleet, they look at every single driver. They look at their record. And unfortunately, they don't weight the count of violations by the number of miles they drive to actually get a rate per mile. They just look at the pure count. And I'd seen underwriters disqualify drivers from fleets because they reached a arbitrary threshold of 5 violations in 3 years or something ridiculous like that, without being weighted for the fact that they run 100,000 miles a year. So I think one of the things that the insurance industry doesn't do a very good job of is actually building in normalized data sets to understand the relative risk of driver accidents or violations across fleets of drivers. So one of the things I think the camera does a great job of, particularly the inwards camera from a training tool, even the outwards camera, once drivers know that technology is installed in the cab, you will see an immediate benefit in the violation rate improvement. So I think all of that is important because underwriters don't just look at claims and accidents, they actually look at driver performance also. And as we head into a hard insurance market, there are going to be tighter insurance guidelines and even stricter scrutiny on driver records. So now would be the time to be doing something about it.
Absolutely. And what are some of the other cost-related benefits of dash cameras that may not be as obvious to those who haven't adopted them yet? Mark, could you speak to that?
Well, I wanted to first dovetail off of what Dean said. It's interesting to note that 8 of 10 violations issued during, top 10 violations issued during Operation Safe Driver Week in July can be detected by dash cams. So nearly every top violation that was picked up during Operation Safe Driver Week, which is looking for the most unsafe behaviors, can be detected by dash cams, inward and outward facing. All right, so while most of the benefits focus on having video evidence to coach and or exonerate drivers, I can tell you that carriers I've talked to cited reduced maintenance expenses as a clearly unexpected benefit, as well as increased fuel efficiency. Why? Well, improved driving technique. You're driving more smoothly, you're easier on the vehicle, you're reducing speeding. That is a huge impact on fuel efficiency. Certainly reduce citations due to reduce speed limit violations for and stop sign violations for carriers using dash cams that have artificial intelligence that can read the signs were benefits as well. And what does that translate to? Lower unsafe driving CSA basic. And the other thing Dean talked about quite a bit was show what you're doing to insurance brokers. Well, show what you're doing to your customers, because when you show them you've taken your safety program to the next level, you have just relieved them of potential vicarious liability by improving your program. So I wouldn't hesitate to share the fact that you're using your dash cams and how you're coaching your drivers with customers.
Yeah.
It's a great point, Mark. One of my first customers I had in a consulting role when I moved here in 2000 was a fleet that was uninsurable. And the commercial insurance company had been on this particular risk for about 7 years, and they were running at about 147% loss ratio, which meant that the insurance company was paying out $1.47 for every dollar in premium, which doesn't make sense from a mathematical perspective. But what happened was that they had no idea of what was causing the accidents, but B, the trucking company had never been to the underwriter to actually show them how they were managing risk. And one of the first things I did once we put in the risk management program and redesigned all of their schedules and put in some training materials and practices and documented all of our procedures, I went to the underwriter in Philadelphia and we had a meeting with them in their boardroom, and they had no idea that the company was actually this committed to safety, and then we turned it around. Within a year, they became, certainly within 2 policy renewals, they became a model fleet in how to manage risk in a 24/7 environment. So it's entirely possible, but the difference was in terms of managing, the perception at an underwriting level and managing insurance cost was the fact that we went to speak to both the customers and the underwriter, involving the intermediary in that case.
Yeah. Excellent. And last question from me before we turn it over to the audience, because we have had several questions come in. Feel free to keep those coming, everyone listening in. What is a good next step for a fleet that is considering dash cams? Dean, would you like to tackle that first?
It's pretty simple. Get one as fast as you can. I wouldn't let my trucks go out of the gate this weekend without one. I honestly wouldn't. I just think it's so important. It's like when I leave home, it's the first thing that gets turned on in the truck. I make sure it's running, it's plugged in, all the connections work. I'm so what's the word I'm looking for? I've had so much bad stuff happen on the road, over 2 million miles as a driver, that I haven't caused, but it's because of the lunacy of other people on the road. And I include some truck drivers in that too, because they do some crazy things at times. But I just find that having something in the cab that helps me exonerate my own driving, it's also a great tool, because if you have hard braking events or rapid decelerations, or you're distracted and drift off the road and hit the rumble strip, or do something stupid, this camera is going to record that. So it's also a great training tool. It reinforces positive behavior. I think the other thing I would make sure that fleets do once you install this technology for your own benefit is make sure that you use it proactively, use it as a way to proactively manage drivers. Don't use it as a stick, because drivers will generally not accept technology where it's seen as something punitive. It has to be attached to something positive.
Absolutely. And Steve, I know you guys had something to share as well.
Yeah, for sure. We'd recommend that you establish a pilot program by putting a few cameras in your fleet and start talking to your drivers. We feel that there's no better way to really understand what the technology can do for you and the benefits you may or may not get than to actually try them out. And as we saw in the comments from the survey, the fleets that started communicating early and frequently with their drivers really saw the greatest return on their investment. So we really believe in the benefits of this technology so much that we'd like to offer all the listeners that are on here today an opportunity to try our J.J. Keller Dashcam Pro for free and with no obligation. It includes free complimentary hardware and a camera, free access to our analytics dashboard, as well as 90 days of free access to our Encompass video management solution. So really we'll give this group an opportunity to get full exposure to all the capabilities of this technology.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Very generous of you all for sure. So to those of you listening in, to learn more about the Encompass Complimentary Dash Cam Pro offer and how JJ Keller can help with identifying problematic and risky driving behavior, exonerating drivers, reducing related insurance costs, and improving driver coaching, please click the raise hand button in your Zoom control panel and we'll reach out to you directly following the webinar. At this point, we will go ahead and take some time for questions from the audience. So if you've not already submitted those, please go ahead and type those into the Q&A section in your control panel. First question here was inevitable. How should we deal with pushback from drivers regarding inward-facing cameras when they quote things like invasion of privacy? Eden, Mark, Steve, one of you like to take that?
I'd be happy to. I think that carriers need to be very careful in crafting a dash cam policy that makes it extremely clear when and how the video is going to be used, when and how the video is triggered. If it's only event-driven, it's clearly not a surreptitious or secret monitoring tool. Drivers need to understand that. I also think that the tone of coaching sessions also really gives the drivers, the initial drivers getting coached, the right impression. So let them spread the good word that no, they weren't picking at me about what I was doing in the cab. It was really about making me a better player when I'm on the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Great. And Dean, obviously this is something that you are very passionate about, and we have a really good question actually. Are truck manufacturers considering installing the dash cams as a component by default? Is that something you've heard about?
No, I haven't heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I know that a lot of telematics vendors who have in-cab solutions, whether they be embedded mobile comm solutions. I know some of those folks are branching off into the video inwards-outwards space. As Mark mentioned, some are including artificial intelligence in there to detect things that the driver can't see. I think, you know, that part, I test drove a truck a little while ago that had this technology in it where it was studying things up the road ahead using artificial intelligence, things that the driver couldn't see. And because when you're constantly checking mirrors, things happen in a split second. The things that I found the technology was picking up occasionally were things that I hadn't noticed that were emerging. So I think that's a big plus from the technology. I think the I'll leave it there. I'll handle the next question.
Okay, great. And for those of you at JJ Keller, question, how important is it to share the videos in near time versus post-trip? Is that something that you guys have any perspective on, or should this be done only in the case of crashes?
well, I think that one, you have to share videos close enough to the event to make it meaningful to that driver. It's important to you. It's important to me that the driver should get the impression that it's important to you by how quickly you talk to them, but also how you couch your language. So should you call them while they're trucking down the road? Hey, I just got an event. I don't think that's terribly healthy unless it looks like something that should be a major concern. I'd wait till you know they're stopped and have a conversation, but really it's about, hey, why don't we, if it's serious enough, talk about routing them in. If it's something that's minor, certainly wait till they're stopped, have a conversation when they're in the right frame of mind to even be receptive. You know, at the end of a 14-hour day might not be the best time to catch the driver, catch them when they're fresh and most receptive to the conversation. But it's the empathy and the point of how you approach a driver that's going to matter as much as, I think, as the timing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Next question. In order to mitigate reluctance of drivers in getting video recorded, would it make sense to test drive the solution for a trial period, let the driver review the recordings first so that he can realize that the majority of the videos would actually exonerate him or her? Is that something you guys have perspective on?
My perspective is I don't know a driver that wouldn't want this technology in their truck, because every driver that's running miles every week sees what goes on ahead of them. They have cars and trucks pulling in front of them all the time. And there's so many near misses every single hour of the day. So, you know, I don't know that drivers, I'm not sure whether this resistance that we're talking about here from drivers is perceived or real. It may be real if it hasn't been installed properly, but again, all the drivers I know, they have this technology in there because they know that there's things going on the road they need to protect themselves from. So I would, my advice would be just put it in. Certainly work with a group of drivers, get their buy-in. If you're talking inwards, then that's a different situation. You need to make sure they understand how you're using the technology. One of the big fears with any inwards camera is that it's monitoring them all the time. That's why they do view it as an invasion of privacy. The ones that are triggered by events seem to have a high level of acceptance. So I think Mark spoke about the coaching aspect of this. That's a critical component. It has to be done in a way that, that the drivers understand that this is about their jobs also. In some insurance claims can actually cost a lot of money. And in 2 cases this year, we've seen bankruptcies because of high insurance costs and claims experience. So I think most drivers would be acceptable to any technology that's going to help their own livelihood.
Marianne, and just to comment on the timing of viewing, if you're having coaching sessions and you actually bring the driver in, we highly recommend that the driver view the video before any feedback is provided. And I would guess that most drivers, after looking at the video, will probably have a pretty good assessment of themselves versus the coach having to pick at them. I think that the coach is really there to fill in the gaps that the driver might have missed, and letting the driver view themselves first is really a way to increase acceptance and decrease the potential defensiveness that might develop being called in to talk.
That's a great point. I might just share a quick anecdote. We had one of the roles I had when I first moved here was installing microsleep detectors in trucks, which was a small camera that measured the rate of eyelid closure. And it was really interesting because a lot of times drivers fall asleep. They're not aware they're asleep because they're asleep. So their memory doesn't necessarily recall. But it wasn't, and when you talk to drivers, we would say during the pilot phase, were you aware that you fell asleep 7 times last night? And they would say, no, that's impossible. That's not me. And then, of course, when you show the small 3-second, quick time movie file that shows their eyelids closing, it becomes one of those life-changing moments because they realize each one of those were near misses that could have resulted in a fatality. So the way it's done is really, really important, but the evidence will actually prove to a lot of drivers that it's a positive thing, because when drivers drive, and this is personal experience, a lot of the miles and things that go on, you don't actually remember. There's a reason for it. It's got to do with the physiology of how the brain works, but our memory, when it gets tired, short-term working memory in particular, disappears when you're fatigued and sleepy. So a lot of things happen that drivers may not remember. Sometimes they'll be defensive and say, that's not true, it wasn't me. And it's not that, they're being, negative or in any way sort of dismissive. It's just that they don't remember, and their first form of defense is always attack. And that way they're trying to defend their own reputation. But the reality is that they don't remember a lot of these events, and that's where this technology is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
I think the front end of this question had to do with what do you do to get started or to try this out or introduce it. Certainly, if we're offering free dash cabs, I don't think it gets any easier. Also, we're offering access to the back office to help monitor it. But get a few drivers that want it. I know there's drivers with great driving skills, like Dean, that would say, put it in my truck. You could find at least 2 or 3 drivers that would say yes immediately to trying him out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right on.
absolutely. And for those of you at JJ Keller, can a 3PL play a role in promoting the use of dash cams? And if so, what can be a possible way to highlight their importance to both carriers and shippers? Any perspective you guys would offer?
I can think of one. Oh, sorry. I can think of one immediately when it comes to loads that are late, for example. Sometimes, you see instances where there's delays for a load and drivers miss appointments. This sort of technology exonerates the fleet and the driver in the event there was something went wrong and the truck was delayed on the side of the road. I think, again, it's another point of being able to prove what happened.
I think.
Yeah, this is Steve. I think another important part, especially for 3PL brokers out there, is to know that they're hiring safe fleets, right? So it would be really important for them in the relationship with their carriers to know that they are doing everything they can to minimize the risk associated with utilizing them as a carrier. So I think that would be really important for those 3PLs.
Yeah, every time when I ran a brokerage operation, every time we used a carrier, we checked their risk scores, and if we saw a carrier that started to lose business because of it, we would certainly want to recommend things that help them get back on the right track, and dash cams would be probably the most impactful thing you could recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. And we have another question. With the concern of cyber attacks and connected devices associated with Internet of Things and mini cameras being connected to OBD ports, what are the chances of a cyber attack putting a driver at risk?
I don't have any knowledge in that space beyond imagining a worst case scenario. But I think the risk is fairly low via a dash cam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question. It's one of those really rare events that it's certainly possible, but it happens a lot in South American countries. They do have technology that disable trucks. That's one of the big issues that a prior company we were faced with in-cab telematics was the bad guys disabling the entire vehicle, including the computer systems, and hijacking the load. So it's certainly possible. I think it's much more of a remote possibility here. One of our partners here at FreightWaves has technology that in fact detects the immediate intrusion of any sort of technology like that and alerts everybody in the network. So there is technology out there to detect that. I'm just not sure how likely it is to happen. But having said that, of course,
you could get a J.J. Keller Dashcam Pro that's not connected to the OBD2 port as well.
there you go.
Great. And a couple of questions that I'll consolidate here. It's talking more about the capabilities of cameras. Have you all heard anything, or is the capability there yet to put abilities within the cameras to detect drowsiness or distraction and provide warnings to the driver before things get risky, or even something like AI coaching that is for the driver and helps the driver as they make a mistake that may only be for the driver's ears? Is that anything that you guys have heard of so far?
Yes. One is the fact that our dash cam does provide lane departure alerts. That's one of those things. Certainly alerts that you're following too close. If you're getting drowsy, you're starting to lose your judgment, I would say. But there are a few select dash cams, I believe, that have eye movement sensors that do watch the driver and provide warnings to the driver based on eye closures and number of times they blink in a certain period of time, et cetera. But the technology is out there. It is getting better, but also you can detect some of that drowsiness by just strict events that get triggered by unexpected movements of the vehicle.
Great. And then one last question we have time for. Does the J.J. Keller camera send the video of incidences to the cloud? And if not, what is required to ensure the video is not lost?
Well, the video is recorded also to an SD card within the camera, as well as the transmission to the back office. So I would say the only way it would get lost is if that SD card happened to fill up. I think there's some controls that you can put in the back office that tells that camera or on the camera itself to not allow overwriting, but then you're kind of stuck when your SD card gets full. So do you want it to loop record, or do you want it to basically fill the card up and stop?
Great. Excellent. Well, we are almost right on that 3 o'clock mark. So that is really all of the time we have for today. This has been a really fun webinar for me to be a part of. So thank you to our partners at J.J. Keller for being with us and partnering on this webinar. Thank you to everyone on the line for taking the time to listen in. And thank you again to all of our speakers for sharing your insights with us today. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation and hope that you'll join us for another webinar again soon. Have a great afternoon.